Welcome to Recross the Paths. My name is Cade, and today I am here with my good friend Dirk. Welcome, Dirk. Glad you're here.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I've said at different times that one of my goals for this project was not to just have my pre-existing friends on a program, and in this case, Dirk is one of my pre-existing friends. We also happen to have the pleasure of working together, but it's been fun to take part in some of Dirk's cube journey. I wanted to get to unpack some of that here.
Yeah, I might argue the entirety of my cube journey.
Yeah, I mean, really, in some ways, right? Because I don't. You may have heard of Cube certainly before we knew each other, but I don't know if you played Cube before we spent time together.
No, actually, before you brought it up, I actually had never even heard of cube as a concept. I'd done some drafting and sealed events and pre-releases as you do, but had never heard of cube or knew what cube was. But with anything magic related, I was excited to learn about something new and see what it was about.
And to be fair, kind of on a completely different axis from how you engage with the game. I guess I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Normally, I like to ask as we get started, why Cube? But I think maybe it'd be interesting here to talk a little bit about your journey with Magic and then how it led to Cube for you.
Yeah, sure. So I started Magic actually on my 18th birthday in 2012.
Now you could legally
And
play Magic.
right, had a friend of mine that had played Magic for a while, and was like, "Hey man, I'd like for you to check this game out. I'd like for you to get engaged with it." And so we went to Walmart and picked up Dual Decks Venser versus Koth. And
Yeah.
my introduction to the game was being handed the Venser deck and saying, "Okay, these are lands. Here's what they do. Go do it." And learned almost nothing in that first couple 3 games of playing Magic, and just kind of went from there.
Knowing your sensibilities in Magic now, I'm kind of surprised that you didn't gravitate toward Koth. But as you suggested, not knowing either of them.
When I say handed, I mean my friend said, "Okay, I'm taking this one. You get this one." And
That's like
I
no choice. Like, here's yours.
correct. And then finished high school, went to school up in central Kansas, and started playing with some friends there, just with what we had in boxes. Did some drafts throughout that time period and kind of slowly developed my collection and kind of figured out what I enjoyed. And then towards my junior year, my good friend Chris and I started playing semi-competitively, going to F&Ms and things of that nature. And then just slowly developed into, hey, we're going to do this. And actually built our class schedules to where we only had classes Friday morning so that in the afternoon we could hop in his van and go to wherever the big tournament was for the weekend. Luckily, being in central Kansas, it was pretty easy to get to some larger events, Denver, Kansas City, Dallas, those kind of things. Even took a trip out to Orlando one weekend and would just drive through the night, sleep at any rest stop we could find, you know, not shower and contribute to the usual Magic player stigma.
No, we're trying to fight stereotypes, Dirk, please.
And then would go play the event, and that's how I really started into the competitive scene. And he graduated about a year before I did, and then he moved and stopped going to a lot of those bigger events.
Well, I've never known you to do anything halfway, but mapping your school schedule around competitive Magic schedule is a pretty serious step.
Yeah, that was certainly a choice. Many nights of hey, we're gonna study tonight turned into, let's pull the decks out. We always had our decks in our our backpacks, and it was like, hey, let's pull decks out. Take a little break. 4 hours later, still haven't done any studying.
Little break, air quotes.
Correct. Yeah, yeah. But then once I'd gotten finished with school, I got engaged to my wife, who's put up with me for 11 years now. So that
It's awesome. Yeah.
poor woman. um, and then life started happening, and I kept playing, but not traveling to larger events. Got really into a job that I thought was going to kind of be my lifelong career, and then some events happened that caused me to leave in late 2020 and start working with the shop at Trade Routes. And one day you had mentioned, that you had a cube and started talking to me about cube. And so over lunch break, we did a hexagon draft and just kind of snowballed from there, and Cube is now my favorite way to play Magic.
That's heartwarming to hear. I think for clarity, because not everybody does Hexagon as a two-player draft format, but Hexagon's one of our favorite ways to play, kind of a preferred method, where you build stacks in a hexagon pattern and you take turns drafting two at a time, but you can only draft two adjacent cards. So it's a little bit of spatial logic in with that as well. But it was also just a quick way for two of us to draft, having not done a lot of like Houseman or Winchester or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of ironic. I originally approached Cube as a way to actually develop my drafting skills because that was always the weakest part of my capabilities. I've done SCG top eights. I've done all the larger events and played with thousands of people over the years. Ended up once my career started tapering off a bit as a bit of a local boogeyman. Folks changing their sideboards because I'd walked in for the tournament for the night, things of that nature.
So, Dirk, would you generally consider yourself a spike as it goes, or like, do you still think of yourself that way?
Generally, yes. My brain's pretty geared towards the competitive side of things. It's just how I've been all my life. And spike is certainly a term that's been used to describe me more than once.
Did Cube challenge that in any way, or did it kind of fit with what you expected?
Originally, no. Like I said, I was using it as a way to develop my personal skills drafting. And over time, that has changed.
So you were playing some of the cubes like that I brought in back when our team at work was much smaller, so we could actually like take lunch breaks
Right.
or using the air quotes again, short breaks to play cube in the office and not butt into work obligations. But how did you get into it then yourself? Because you picked up, I think it was a popper cube pretty quickly from there.
Yeah, Pauper was a format that I really enjoyed. It felt like legacy cheap was the best way I could describe it. Higher power that a lot of people wouldn't really expect from an all commons format, but it still had room to allow you to tinker and kind of make a deck your own. And so when we started talking about Cube, Pauper Cube really resonated with me because it was a lot of cards I was familiar with or that I already owned and just had, in my 12 deck deep war chest at one point for that. So
Yeah, you did try to introduce some of us at the shop to Popper as a constructed format
I
to
sure did.
mixed success.
Turbo Fog will do that.
It will lead to opinions and stories for sure. So then, Popper Cube, you suggested that something that was accessible, right, or something that was at least cost effective to put together compared to some of the constructed decks you were trying to piece together at the time.
Yeah, the list was I grabbed the literal Popper Cube off of CubeCon and went, "Yep, I have half of this," and then spent a TCG player bonus bucks days just hitting refresh trying to get my cart to go through and get the remaining 270 or whatever it was at the time, and just got the rest of it and put that together and ran it a few times to mixed results. Turns out, even in an all commons format, there's still some very powerful cards that in Singleton Limited can really warp games. Great sort of tier was one of them that
Yeah,
really got a lot of people having some specific emotions from time to time.
turns out those cards that say Commander on them impact differently head to head.
Correct.
I want to draw attention to. I think there's something valuable about how you pulled the list. I think you said from Cube Cobra, right? Like from another list that somebody had put together. That's also reminiscent of a lot of constructed sensibilities too. Like there's a measure of deck building, but there's also a lot of saying what's worked and how can I borrow that.
Yeah, absolutely. And my constructed approach is the net decker that a lot of people like to use. That was certainly my approach. It was, you know, me and my four friends playing on evenings and weekends will never have the same amount of testing that the hive mind of thousands of players will have. And okay, on the whole, this is the exact list that is performing the best. I know I'm weak to X, Y, and Z deck. What can I tweak in the sideboard to make it less soft to those matchups? Play to that way, and also understand that some decks I'm just going to lose to, and that's fine. But having the approach of this is what the hive mind says is right, this is what I'm going to do, make a little edit, and then learn how to play that deck as to the best of my abilities.
Did you find similarities to that in Cube, borrowing a list from somebody else to get started? Did you find that you stuck to that list or did you make changes?
I didn't make changes personally. The list that I originally built was a carbon copy list, but I rapidly came to understand that Cube was very community driven. And so what I was doing was whenever somebody would play the cube, whoever 3-0'd, I bought them a pack. You got to pick a common out of that pack and swap it with a common that was in the cube. So in doing that, the list certainly did change over time, but I couldn't tell you what cards got swapped in and out because I didn't do them myself. I don't even think I ever actually updated it on my Cube Cobra, but that was just a way for folks to engage with the cube that wasn't just things that I was doing, and really tried to lean into that community aspect of things.
Do you know where that idea came from, to have other folks swap in cards for you?
Generally, I don't remember. I think it was, as a spike, I like to feel that there's some sort of stakes involved whenever playing Magic, and so I think that was the first time I ran the cube. I was like, "Hey, so and so, here's your pack for winning. Thanks everybody for playing." And the player was like, "Well, can I just take this card out of the cube that I really don't like and put this card in?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely, do that. Feel free."
That's so good.
And so it changed over time, not always to great effect, but I made sure to have whoever put the card in sign it, make your mark on it. That way we know who to blame whenever somebody hates this card. But
But no, that's cool too because it personalizes the cube as well. Then, even if it is mostly the stock list, then over time it becomes something else or becomes something more personal anyway.
correct.
So, not to out you on this, but you do tend to cycle through projects pretty quickly sometimes. Once something's run its course, you're ready to move to the next thing. What led to you moving past the Pauper Cube?
Yeah, and that has certainly always been the case. I was changing competitive decks almost weekly back when I played competitively. But the Pauper Cube is still around. It's in a box in the back of my closet, so it's still around. But I eventually hit a point where I realized that Cube was the opposite mentality of how I usually approached Magic, in that cubes were very personal projects that people put time and effort and care into, and decided that I wanted to do that. That was something that I wanted to move on from, just having this list that someone else spent however many hours putting together and curating, to something that was my own.
I think one more stop I want to make before we get to your next Cube project there. We got to travel together to CubeCon. It would be 2 years ago now, I think.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, I seem to recall, and not to put words in your mouth, but I seem to recall that being a really like foundational experience for you and how you engage with Cube and how that has colored your participation in the format.
Yeah, it absolutely was. I distinctly remember having a conversation with you and Judge Bones leading up to CubeCon, going, "Hey, you should try to play some things that you're never gonna have another opportunity to play." And the spike in me was like, "Nope, not how I'm gonna do this."
You threatened to you're like, I'm gonna go in and just draft Bones' cubes and your cubes. We're both like, no, do not do this.
Correct, and that's actually what I did round one, because my mentality was, okay, I've played Cade's cube probably more than anybody but him, and I know it forwards, backwards, and sideways. I know exactly how to approach this and what to do, and immediately proceeded to go 0-3, not winning a game. It was a fantastic experience. You know, pack one, pick one, Rhythm of the Wild, pack one, pick two, and I was called Invigorating Hot Tub, Invigorating
Hot
Hot
springs.
Springs. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it's
and
sort of a hot tub.
right, I was like, this is a great setup, and then tried to put together a cute engine based around those two cards. And it turns out when you build an engine, you need the pieces of the engine for it to work, and without them, it just doesn't. And so after going 0-3, I was like, the spike mentality went completely away, and I went, fantastic. I cannot top 8 now without literally going 9-0 the rest of this time. That's not pressure I want to put on myself. And so I went through Hedron Network and changed all of my selections. I had your cube, two of Bones' cubes, and one of my friends from college that was there. I had his cube in there as well. And I still ended up drafting Bones' Almond Card Desert in the second round, but then got to play Penrose Cube and Tempo Cube the second day. And what those experiences showed me out after that was it was the first time since I could basically remember of playing Magic that people were just playing for the love of the game. Sure, there were still the folks that were getting bent out of shape over a loss, but an overwhelming majority of the people that were there were just really excited that, hey, you pulled off your 4-card combo to win the game, and just got to meet a lot of really genuine people that were excited about the community and about cubing in general, that really changed my entire perspective on the concept of cube.
Yeah, there's something really special about that. And I never want to, you can't see me smiling here as you're talking about going 0-3 and how that makes you go, all right, well, I'm going to try something differently. But then how special, like you said, where people just get to sit down and play. And that's not to diminish the experience of being competitive either. Right. Because there's a joy in winning and there's a joy in preparing something to the point where you're comfortable with it and to take it to tournament. But I don't know, something kind of fun about the off books nature of cube, I guess, that appeals in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of how I've had to change my approach to Commander over the years, where, these are 4-player games. You're going to win 25% of the time and you're going to lose 75% of the time.
And if you win more than that, people get mad at you.
Correct. Got a lot of experience there too with a build of my own in Commander, but that's for a different conversation.
So I don't want to say like it's this seismic shift in understanding, but with some fresh perspectives on what cube can look like and in personalizing it yourself, I think that may bring us, Dirk, to the trash bag.
Yes, the trash bag. It is certainly a concept. As you noted, I tend to bounce from projects rather quickly, and after CubeCon, I think I went through 5 or 6 different cubes that I was trying to build and just make perfect. And that's not how this project turned out. I'm really glad that it didn't.
Yeah, it's often not how cube works broadly, right? Very few folks
Right.
have, here is the polished 360 card list. It's perfect. There are no possible cuts, no possible adds. It's always in flux. Well, let's start with the overview. Give us the elevator pitch for the trash bag cube.
Yeah. So I approached building this cube as how can I make Magic players as uncomfortable as I possibly can?
I love the shift from like everybody was so welcoming, so excited to play the game. How can I how can I make them uncomfortable?
That's what's great about it though is even though players are uncomfortable, as soon as I explain the concept, they're on board. They're totally in. And the original concept of trash bag came from, okay, I want to, we all have our deck boxes and bags and all these fancy things. I'm like, I want to have something that is physically kept in a trash bag. And it certainly lives there. I think it's an old recycled like disposable plates bag because every other trash bag I got that was small enough ripped instantly when I put cards into it.
I don't mean to keep derailing your story
No,
here.
you're fine. You're
One of
fine.
my favorites about your setup was sending me videos of you testing the trash bag and various states of failure in that process.
Oh yeah, when it exploded, yeah, that was a great 432 card pickup moment. But it's kept in a trash bag. The packs are rubber banded together with one of the cards facing down, so you have functionally a sealed pack. And it is intended to be played unsleeved, no play mats, as rough as I can make it. And I was like, okay, this is what I want to do with this. And then in the very first draft, I actually ended up getting got by my own oof moment by hearing a player riffle shuffle, which messes with me personally. And as soon as it happened, I was like, oh, yep, nope, this is what I set this up for. This is how we got there. But it is a 432 card list designed to be played specifically with 8 players. It's a desert, and all of the cards have come from a section of the store that we lovingly call the chew toys, which are how do you always your pitch is always so great for it.
It's playable cards at playable prices.
Right. So
Basically stuff that usually is below our threshold of what we mail out or below the threshold of condition of what we usually sell, but they're still cards that people will often put in decks. So not like actual garbage in most cases, but
Well, in this case, it is.
well, I mean, yeah, right, right here in this particular setup. So there's a lot of elements to unpack in this. So you mentioned no sleeves generally. Is this a bar cube as you think of it?
Not particularly, and I will correct myself slightly. The only things that are sleeved are the tokens. The tokens are sleeved, and I'm slowly trying to get the fanciest, coolest version of these tokens that I can get. But those are kept in their own deck box that are also stored in the trash bag. So some of these cards are getting very, very beat very, very fast, but that's okay.
Kind of an aesthetic experience. But I guess for many people, that bar sensibility of no sleeves, that usually comes with no tokens, no counters. But you don't dodge any of that.
No, yeah, it certainly uses, I believe the token counts 34. And the first draft, actually, I kind of got caught flat footed because I didn't have counters, and there were tons of them that were needed. And so folks ended up using whatever we had on hand or turning the card specific ways to denote number of counters. So I've got a dice bag with it now that hopefully will eliminate that in the future.
Hopefully the dice bag doesn't come loose in the trash bag.
It is the quintessential Crown Royal bag that that Magic players all seem to have rolling around somewhere.
So I think there's an important element before we talk about any particular choices made for this cube is how the cards are selected, which to be clear is not necessarily you selecting all of them.
Yeah, and I would state that I didn't select majority of them. I determined after CubeCon, as I was trying to build different projects, that I am not great at cube building generally, which probably stems from using net decking my entire career and not building decks of my own. And so I would just end up either pushing on a list for 4 or 5 hours and then burning myself out and never circling back to it because my brain was done with it, or I would just get analysis paralysis of like, okay, it's done. Okay, now how do I make it perfect? And I would just spend several hours trying to fine tune every single little detail that I could. And that also led to some of those projects just getting put to the side very quickly. I think still up on my Cube Cobra page is Diggy Diggy Cube.
Named after the
Winter Saga by
Winter Saga.
Windrose.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And it turns out that trying to make a dwarf centric cube when so many of the older ones are terrible and so many of the newer ones are busted by comparison doesn't lead to good balancing. Every test draft that I had somebody do, there wasn't a card that hadn't released in the last 5 years in their deck. So I was like, okay, so this project isn't going to go the way I want it, which is fine. It taught me a lot.
So then I think for clarity, I don't remember if we've explicitly said most of the cards in the cube are chosen by members of the community. You kind of crowdsourced this project in a lot of ways.
Right. Yeah, and yeah, sorry, I got a little sidetracked there.
No, it's hard to not get sidetracked with Diggy Diggy Cube.
So functionally, what I decided after that, multiple attempts on my own, was that okay, I need to, as you said, crowdsource some of this, and so I just slowly over the course of probably 9 months, every time somebody would come into the shop that I knew or knew drafted or enjoyed that kind of environment, I would tell them, hey, just do me a quick favor as you're picking through the chew toys, grab me 2 or 3 cards that you would personally play in a draft. And that certainly had some mixed results.
Say more.
Well, I think the hardest part was actually telling some people no. I would get brought Jokel Hops and Armageddon and things of that nature, which don't necessarily lend themselves to a friendly, limited environment. I think the only major one that I end up leaving in the list was Balance, because I figured that was fair enough.
It's balanced at least.
Yeah, for sure. I haven't seen it resolved yet, so I'm not sure if that's going to stay in there forever. But it might. I don't know.
I think there's something funny about that process that means that you have kind of the unique position of having moments where you don't know what's in your own cube to some degree.
Yeah, that's certainly an aspect of it. Every draft is like Christmas morning for me. At times, I'll open a pack and go, "Wait, this is in here. This is in the cube." okay, great. Like that's certainly become less the case over time as I've, looked at it more and more. But the very first draft, there were several cards that I was like, this could be a problem. Okay.
And I know that's a little bit tongue in cheek because I know you reviewed what you had and you compared them to a list. Did you work like from a spreadsheet or from card counts? How did you set about trying to turn this into I don't know if I want to say a balanced environment, but like turning it into something that matched numbers you would expect?
Yeah. So how I approached that was functionally, if you look back at my blog post on Trash Bag, there are a ton of them on the front end where just anytime somebody was handing me cards, I was checking against what was already shown in the blog and then saying, hey, this is actually already in here or not. And then once I had it finalized, I would add those cards to it so I could make sure that I kept it as singleton. I believe I actually succeeded in making it completely singleton. And then towards the end, once I got down to about the last 100-ish cards, I took it back on myself and used that opportunity to smooth out the edges. Every color has an exact even amount. Every dual land's exactly even. Artifacts are kind of an outlier. There's 28 of them compared to the rest of the list. But there's exactly 60 multicolor with 5 of every color combination. Sorry, 5 or 6. And there's one outlier Naya card of Fiery Justice that I just needed one last card to put in, and that was the one I didn't want to take out. So I use that as an opportunity to smooth things out. The curves aren't perfect. There's certainly, if you look at everything but blue, basically one drops are pretty limited, and then blue has 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 of them. So the curves aren't perfect, but it ends up being fine. I got to the end of the project and started doing some test drafts and looking at it and making sure it was where I wanted it to be, and was pleasantly surprised with some of the synergy and things that worked. I think the very first test draft that I did utilized Codex Shredder and Lantern of Insight with a blue-black discard control shell, and I was like, this is actually pretty strong. I wasn't expecting this to come out of it.
So with this combination of having some of your personal hand and a wealth of community input, do you feel like this cube has your fingerprints on it, or does it feel like it's something that's a little bit more, I don't know, representative of others in a way?
A bit of both. It was certainly my willingness to trust the community to make something that wasn't completely unplayable, but also not, vintage power cube, that allowed me to engage with folks. And I think I kind of had the opposite problem that you have with most first drafts of cubes. If I actually had like a wait list of like 9 people that had helped me pick these cards, that they're like, hey, I want to do this. And so by doing that, it really got the community involved, which was the entire concept I had behind the project.
I love that. So, some quick design thoughts. How did the desert element come into play? Like, were you ever tempted to just leave it as a regular cube?
So that partially stems from the spike in me. Desert Draft adds another layer to cubing for me that really causes the draft to not just be, hey, I'm going to grab this absolute banger that's in this pack. Instead, I'm going to grab this swamp because I'm not getting my land count that I need to get there. And the spike portion of me has ended up, I'm 9-1 in desert cubes currently, historically. So that's partially where that stemmed from. I'll step back real quick. I, as you said, switched from idea to idea, and I think I went through 4 or 5 different concepts for this. The first one being, everybody starts with a trash for treasure, and you could at any time swap that trash for treasure for a card in the pack. And then whoever ended up with trash for treasures in their pool at the end could choose at any point during the event to cash that trash for treasure in to start the game with a treasure token, which was very complicated
So,
and
yeah, I would say
ended
that's a
up,
lot of new elements. Yeah.
yeah, it certainly overcomplicated things very quickly. And then I think I had the concept of, everybody gets a cogwork librarian, just because I love that card in any cube. It's such a, quintessential part of cubing. And so as I was working through that, I thought back to, playing the Desert Cube at CubeCon and then listened to the primer that you and Bones put together over Desert Cube. And after listening to that specific episode, I was like, this is it. This is the hook I want for this. And it also made it to where I could keep it in a trash bag a little easier. I didn't have to keep the basic lands in its own thing. So it,
A
served two
separate land
purposes.
baggie.
Right. That'd probably be like a sandwich bag or something. But
There's another element that we haven't touched on yet to trash bag, and it kind of harkens back to what you were doing with the Pauper Cube. You want to tell us a bit of what happens at the end of the draft, or at the end of the event.
Yes. Importantly, at the end of the event.
Yeah, not before games.
So as I was coming to a close on finishing this list, I was like, okay, how can I keep the community involved in what I'm doing with this? And originally I was on the line of, well, we could just swap a chew toy out of the same color, but realized not always gonna have access to those. And I believe it was you that mentioned Sharpie Cube after we were talking about Sticker Cube for a while, and I was like, these are already heavily played, at least might as well just make them damaged. And so at the end of every event, all players get to Sharpie one card to make it functionally or mechanically better. Use that how you will. Some people think that making a card mechanically better is making the card worse, and that's fine. So it lets that community engagement keep going, and turns out produces some really broken Magic cards.
Yeah, so basically, I know I've seen a couple of the examples here. You're able to mark out some downsides. Like, I think my favorite is still the Teferi's Isle, that is a land that enters tapped, but then it has phasing, and it adds double blue. And I believe it was you who
Yeah.
used their Victory Sharpie to remove phasing, so you just have a double blue land.
I removed phasing and it enters tapped, so it is just a double blue source. Play it, and it's basically playing two islands at once.
Amazing.
Yeah,
But there were variety too. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some pretty messed up cards in here. I updated the notes on the actual Cube Cobra, but like Martial Coup is now X white and reads, put X 1/1 white soldier creature tokens into play, destroy all other creatures.
It's like no minimum anymore.
Correct. I mean, at worst, it's a 2-mana Wrath of God, or we have Deathmatch that is 3 and a black, and now reads, whenever a creature comes into play, target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn, which actually helped the cube a lot. Removal's pretty light, generally speaking. So as soon as I saw that change, I was like, well, that fixes that problem for one person. And I think personally my absolute favorite is Voice of Resurgence, which is now just a green-white 2/2 that says, whenever an opponent casts a spell, or when Voice of Resurgence dies, make a green-white elemental creature token. Its power and toughness are equal to the number of creatures you control. That is certainly on my watch this card list, because that's a powerful card now. Like, it was already a powerful, standard heater back in the day, but you take that important line of text off there, and it's really broken.
Yeah, Voice of Resurgence far removed from being a scourge, I suppose, but this would help for sure.
For sure.
So, Dirk, how do you think of power in a cube like this, with it being so eclectic in how it's put together? Like, do you worry about high outliers like that?
I'm still developing thoughts there. One of the notes that I received from the first draft was, yeah, I was kind of underwhelmed with the power level. This particular player functionally just plays vintage powered cube, so maybe not necessarily the best piece of feedback I've ever received, but other folks, stereotypical how is this still in the pack, got dropped a lot in some of these drafts. But I'd say on the whole it's not super powerful, and the things that are certainly do warp some games. But my hope is that as more and more cards get sharpied, that total overall power is a bit more balanced. Because as I was resetting the cube for another draft, I intentionally took all of the Sharpie cards and put them to the side and was inserting them into random packs to ensure that we didn't end up with one pack that had, 2 or 3 of these that could really cause some problems.
Well, I suppose if they're all in the same pack, then the same person doesn't get all of them.
Sure, then everybody gets
So-
one at least.
we're leaning into Joe Anderson's power pack territory. Here's your Sharpie block that you have to pass around.
Well, it was funny you mentioned shaking the bag to shuffle the cube up, and it turns out that doesn't randomize things very well. I had a player at one point get a pack that was entirely basic lands somehow. So things that seem random apparently sometimes aren't.
Well, and it's like that's the artistic choice to describe. Yes, we will do this to perform this mechanical game function. And it's like it turns out maybe the best function is just to shuffle the cube.
Right, right.
Dirk, what have you found to be the most challenging part of building and curating this cube?
Finishing it, honestly, is the answer because, as I've noted, I try to min max everything and make it as perfect as I possibly can, and realize with this concept that just wasn't going to happen. It's a community driven thing that I've just been being handed cards for the last 9 months. It's never going to be perfect. I think, of those last 100 cards that I added, I was gnashing my teeth over the last like 10. And then finally I was like, all right, we're just going to finish this. And I reached over and grabbed a brick of Bloomborough draft chaff because that was the set that had recently released, and just picked 10 cards out of it in the colors I needed and finalized the list and called it good.
Has your experience with the trash bag cube, has that encouraged you to do more cube projects, or does that feel like, hey, this is a comfortable thing to work with for a while before moving on?
It's done a bit of both, with the changing functionality of sharpieing things. It's allowing it to grow organically over time, but still gives me something to be like, is this what needs to be in here? But it is allowing me to focus on other projects. I recently finished up my first Five Alive that we're lovingly calling Quick Draw. That is certainly a concept.
Oh, and nowadays, as the business has become more busy, I guess, Five Live is about the only thing we have time for on meal breaks, if anything. So
Yeah,
that seems like more the speed of what we're after.
maybe better to say drafting a Five Alive is what we have time for, but
Yeah, squeezing in the moment. Well, if you have to draft your opening hand and then come back and play the game later, like that's
all right. What
too
turn
much.
were we on? Who's game action? Okay, we're good.
So what's next for Trash Bag? Like, I guess just continuing to iterate on draft more, Sharpie more.
That's the primary part of it. The basics that I put in there were just a set of generic basics that I'm slowly converting over to snow-covered lands as those enter the chew toys. Because I gotta stick with the theme. I can't just go buy a bunch of snow basics and call it good. The main reason there being is that it turned out, in that sub $4 zone, is there were a lot of cards that, snow permanents matter. And I didn't really at the time have anything to make that work. Scred is a great example that I would love to have in here.
Scred not good if you if you don't have any snow permanents.
Correct. So I would love to have a copy of Scred in here. Of course, as I'm trying to pull another card that cares about snow permanents out of my head, I can't. But
That's just more copies of Scred.
Yeah, it's just every red card is now Scred. It's fine. But just having it to where I can access those would maybe allow me to make some changes that I wasn't able to in the beginning.
You mentioned you learned a lot from like working through things like the Diggy Diggy cube or like working through the Popper cube. Do you feel like you have any high level takeaways from your experience with Trash Bag so far?
I don't know if it's high level, but it my main takeaway as I was sitting down and thinking about things is that it's okay to lean on the community. Cube players will always take the opportunity to talk about Cube. And, if you're struggling with something and trying to figure something out, like as I was working through iterations, it was real nice to have, you and Bones available to just bounce ideas off of, or say, hey, tell me if this is bad or if this is a ridiculous idea. Um, just having, access to resources and willingness to use them, because as Magic players, we sometimes think we're islands, if that makes sense. We have to figure this out on our own, and it's okay to have other people help you. And projects don't have to be perfect. It just has to be something that you feel people might enjoy. And like in the case of Trash Bag Cube, I'm not sure that everybody enjoys the actual gameplay, but man, people get very excited when you pull out a bag of a bunch of rubber banded cards and they go, ugh, this is a weird concept. All right, let's try it. So
Yeah, it's kind of a positive discomfort in a way.
right,
You
right,
talk about
right.
like uncomfortable in the sense of this is something I've never experienced quite in this way. Does that feel, you talk about being able to lean on the community. Does that feel decidedly different from your experience with Constructed?
Oh, absolutely. When I was in the constructed world, you're, working with your competition most of the time. And my little friend group that would travel to events and do things like that, at the end of the day, we're all still friends, but you're between me and top eight. Sorry, buddy. Like we're still competitors at the end of the day. And that's why when I joined Malevolent, I specifically signed up to be the modern player. Like, everybody had their own specific slot that they were in. So in that case, I was able to lean on other players and nobody was approaching it from the concept of, well, you might use this card to beat me, so I'm not gonna talk about it, which might have just been, the general mindset of competition, but it never really seemed to lean towards working together, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Well, I know there is camaraderie to be found in that kind of setup. You think of your teams that play test together, you think of teams that build together, or like groups like I know with what Malevolent did at different events, trying to work that way. But I imagine it's like more of a different flavor, where, like you said, if the target is to win, there can generally only be one winner at the end of it.
Correct. Every event's a Highlander event, it turns out.
Well, Dirk, what advice would you want to share? I know you've hit on a couple of these ideas. But what advice would you want to share with other designers as they're working on their own projects?
Mainly just to know that your cube doesn't have to be 100% fleshed out, perfect, completely smooth curve, and all of these interactions work exactly the way you want them to. It's okay to have, some clunkers in there. And then the piece of advice I hear a lot is just get cards on the table. That's a really good piece of advice that, like I said, I was getting towards the end of the project and him hauling over these last 10 cards and finally just had to make the decision of, okay, slam this in here and we're done. Let's draft some cube. Having the understanding that things don't have to be perfect. That's the most high level takeaway I can give you from that.
And I know that you learned a lot from from putting cards on the table there.
Absolutely.
Well, Dirk, as we are trending toward that part of the show, I do get to ask you my favorite question here, which is if you could have any card printed as a promo, what card would you pick and who would you have do the illustration?
I've thought on this question ever since you approached me about, doing an interview. And I think my answer is threefold fanboying a bit. You know,
Sure.
shameless plug. I would really like to see the card trade routes done, just because that's our business.
Yeah.
And Junji Ito does some glorious art that I really wish would happen more in Magic. And recently, I finished the campaign for the game Death Stranding 2, and logged a lot of hours in that game. And Junji Ito did some special art for that game. So I
Oh,
would
cool.
really, really like to see a Death Stranding themed trade routes by Junji Ito. I think that would just be like I would frame a copy of that card.
I was sitting here as you were describing that, thinking, boy, that would be pretty terrifying in a way, and I didn't make the connection. But Death Stranding being a game about delivery, like about
Correct.
literal trade routes,
Literal trade routes
that's
that you're building over time. It's
that's perfect. That's a really good answer, Dirk. I like that a lot.
thanks, man. Like I said, I've thought about that for a long time. Like,
Well, Dirk, this has been a treat to get to sit down like this and talk. And, I got to sit really on the sidelines and watch Trash Bag take shape over these last months. You get to watch the drafts, or well, at least hear the post-mortem of the drafts, what happened for everybody. But as you described, seeing how excited folks have been about that and seeing how inspiring it's been for you, I think, and not to put words or ideas in your mouth, but just it's been encouraging to me to watch you be excited about it. So I'm grateful to you taking the time to share that here, where I hope it will encourage many others as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate you having me and really genuinely appreciate you introducing me to Cube as a concept. I mean, without you, I would never have probably played Cube. I would still be, you know, driving 200 miles to go play an SCG con or something like that. But
No, thanks for tolerating a lot of hexagon drafts over lunch breaks.
oh,
well,
glad to do it, bud.
well, Dirk, if folks want to read more about the Trash Bag Cube or maybe connect, follow up on other projects, where would be a good place for us to point them?
Yeah, so Trashbag Cube is up on Cube Cobra under the tag "This is Trash," and that was that was a tag I made sure to grab as soon as I made the concept.
I
Um,
completely forgot that. That's so good.
and generally, I'm not a huge social media person. I have Facebook and probably wouldn't if I didn't need it for work. But I did recently specifically make a blue sky for Cube Talking, and that is all I engage with it for. I'm on there maybe once a week, depending on how busy that particular week is. My tag on there is dirkj.bluesky.social.
So it sounds like maybe the best way is just to do a sample draft on Trash Bag Cube and then comment so that you can comment back.
Sure, that's probably the best.
Well, Dirk, thank you again so much. It's as often as we get to connect to sit down in this context and just chat Cube for the moment. So thank you again for being part of it, my friend.
Absolutely, brother. Thank you for letting me join.